Okay, today we're going to talk about Chapter 6 from your online textbook, which is dealing with U.S. imperialism. All right, imperialism, I like to think of it as a race for resources. If we're talking about U.S. imperialism, we're talking like post-Civil War, 1865 to about 1916, pre-World War I involvement. Imperialism is this idea of, think of it as like nations sort of taking over other nations or attempting to take over other nations. Or like I said, the race for resources. When we talked about industrialization, we talked about the United States getting bigger and how it requires more resources to grow its industry. Well, sometimes we need to look beyond our own borders and our own country to gain access to more resources and, more importantly, more markets. The more stuff we make, the more we want to sell it beyond our borders. Sure, we want to sell it within the United States, but hey, there's a whole world out there that we can sell our stuff to, so why not? The more we sell, the more we can make. And in this map here, you can see clearly the United States, and then it's showing all the territories that we've gained out in the Pacific Ocean here. We talked before about how throughout the Pacific you got all these tiny little islands. You can see this is where the United States in the orange has some territories. And you have some other nations involved here in the chart. You see the yellow is Japan, so here's Japan's imperial empire. The green represents Russia. This would be Great Britain. The brown would be the Dutch. So you can see like the whole world, or all the major industrial nations in the world, are sort of starting to compete. And as you can see here in this map, space is limited. People are trying to get out there and gain these resources, gain this land before the other countries can get to it. Hence, that's why I like to look at it as a race for resources. So U.S. towards internationalism, also known as expansionism. This idea of expansionism, it's nothing new. It's been part of the American history for a while. If you go back to 7th grade, you learn about the Monroe Doctrine in 1823. This is where the United States is basically telling Europe and other major countries to stay out of our part of the world. They basically draw a line, figuratively, in the Atlantic Ocean and tell Europe, hey, don't come over to this part of the world, stay out of the Western Hemisphere. North America, South America, that's going to be our little sphere of influence. That's where the United States is going to be dominant. And if we also look at the idea or concept of manifest destiny, which you also learned in 7th grade, and we also talked about manifest destiny version 2.0 this year when we were talking about Western expansion, that's also ties into this idea of U.S. expansionism. It's looking to expand our own borders, expand beyond our own borders. So what's driving U.S. imperialism? Why are we doing this? What is the causes? What's the reason? You got missionary impulses, military, and economic impulses, or economic reasons. Missionary is referring to religious reasons, not just for the United States, but traditionally for most of the industrial nations. They would have these religious excursions. They would try to expand their religious beliefs, Christianity, to other parts of the world. They felt it was part of their Christian duty. Militarily, if you're trying to gain a military edge over other industrial countries, the more territory you have and the more access to resources that you have, the stronger your military will be. The more bases you can set up, the more you can protect those foreign resources and foreign investments. If I'm going to take over a bunch of islands somewhere in the Pacific, who's to stop the French or the Germans or the British from simply taking over those islands? I'm going to need a strong navy to protect those islands. So the military is going to be a huge driving force for U.S. expansionism. And the real big one is just economic reasons. Like we said before, the idea of gaining access to more resources and gaining access to more markets. We need to sell our stuff to more people. Yeah, resources, fruit. We'll talk more about dole and fruit when we get into U.S. expansionism into Hawaii. Like I said, if you have a strong navy, you are going to become a world power. In the mid-1800s, early 1900s, if you wanted to be a key military power or industrial power, one of the strongest countries, you basically had to have a strong navy. Without it, you were nothing. And we're transitioning. The industrial nations are transitioning from the old wooden ships to like the steel-hulled battleships, the more modern type of ships. These are faster, they can cover more territory, they're stronger, they use torpedoes, they've got advanced cannons. This is essentially the military might here. This is what's going to allow you to expand into foreign countries. These new ships, though, they're going to require a lot more coal. So to get from point A to point B or get around the world to protect your resources, you have to have enough coal on board to get you to certain places. The world is so vast, however, that you just simply can't carry enough coal within your ship to get you around the world. So the other reason for gaining access to territory is to create these coaling stations, right? Your naval bases, your fueling stations, essentially. If you want to protect your resources or your territory or land, say somewhere in the Pacific or in Asia or parts of Africa or wherever, it's nice to be able to get your naval power or naval ships out to these little islands, fuel up on coal, then you can continue on to the destination where you need to go. So the more access or the more territory you have, the farther you can extend your naval power. That's the key point. Economic reasons. Different markets, different things that we can't grow or produce in the United States. Think of like tropical fruits. There's only a few places, excuse me, in the United States where you can grow certain fruits. Sugarcane is going to be a huge industry, and sugarcane is another type of product that can only be produced in certain parts of the world. Food is pretty bland. Any sort of spices or sugars, anything that can make our food taste better, it's going to be in huge demand. So the United States is really interested in gaining access to sugarcane to produce sugar. Here we see some pictures. This is sugarcane. Really labor-intensive work harvesting this stuff. You literally got to bend over in these fields and hack these things down, machetes. It's not fun work. It's hard work. It's like, you know, your sugarcane's growing near the equator. It's hot. It's humid. This is very labor-intensive work. And again, other resources such as like minerals, think of coal, think of gold, the iron ore, things for steel, all those sorts of things that we have in the United States, but it never hurts to have more of it from other places. So basically gaining access to markets around the world to improve or continue the trend of industrialization. And again, the more stuff we have, the more we can sell to other people. So the U.S. wants to get more resources to sell to more people around the world. Again, keeping that idea of industrialization going. And let's talk about some early steps of U.S. imperialism. With the United States in 1853, 1854, so this precedes the Civil War, the United States is starting to think about how can we expand into the Pacific, specifically in Japan. In 1853, the United States pushes into Tokyo Bay with Commodore Matthew Perry. He's like the guy who's in charge of the naval fleet. And he's basically looking for Japan to open up its ports for trade. Japan, for like hundreds of years, has been this isolationist country. They've been isolating themselves, separating themselves from other foreign countries. They don't really let anyone into their country. They had this sort of mindset that they were superior to everyone else and they don't really need to or want to trade with foreign countries, so they just simply didn't. So for the most part, people kind of left them alone. They wanted to trade with Japan, but Japan was like very isolationist and kept people out. That changes with Matthew Perry because he basically rolls in with these new naval ships with the modern guns and everything else and basically gives Japan an ultimatum. He basically says, open up your port to trade or we'll come back in a year and we'll basically light the place up. Japan, you know, seeing this display of naval power and might, I mean, these ships are technology and military technology that, you know, Japan is not privy to, so they basically say, wow, we probably should open up trade, and they do so. Perry comes back a year later, and Japan is more than willing to open up trade. They're really impressed with the U.S. naval fleet. Hey Japan, trade with us or else. That's literally how it went down. Here's a artist rendition of it. You can see the Japanese and their small boats, little canoes here, going out to see Matthew Perry's, you know, steam-powered ship, and they're like, holy cow, that's impressive. Let's trade with this guy. He's got salon quality hair, and huge naval ships. Let's trade. And just to kind of give you an idea geographically, where are we in the world? Here is the Pacific Ocean. This area here, this is Japan. This is where Matthew Perry is sailing into. We want to start to open up and establish United States military power and economic presence in Asia.